The Kali architecture is based on Debian, right? And it basically has all the underlying utilities and facilities of the Debian Linux distribution. It just has many and many different hacking tools that you can, of course, take advantage of for pen testing. Now, we will go over some of the major categories of these tools later in this lesson. However, I want to actually cover a few things about the underlying Kali base install and the default username and password. Now, typically, we always suggest that the user, or any user, use a non-privileged account when running any operating system, right? So that includes Linux, Windows, Mac OS X, instead of actually running root at all the time or privileged account all the time. Use things like sudo. Definitely use sudo whenever you need the escalation of privileges and to run, commands as root, right? But typically, it's a very well-known security best practice that you do not run everything in root, and that you actually run sudo whenever needed, right? So that provides an extra layer of protection between the user and any potential destructive operating system commands or operation, and of course, from preventing any type of malicious activity for actually taking place in the system. Now, on the other hand, Kali Linux contains many tools that can only run with root privileges. Also, it is not typical that you run, as root if you have a multi-user environment, right? But in this case, actually, with Kali Linux, it is actually very unlikely that you will run Kali Linux in a multi-user environment, right? Typically, you're either running in your laptop. If you're actually doing a pen testing for a customer, or if you're doing pen testing internally in the corporation, you probably will have them in virtual machines, throughout your environment, and many installations of it. But typically, you're not gonna interact with the system, or multiple users do interacting with the system at the same time, right? Now, if you do have some type of automation for pen testing, and you have some scripts and everything, you actually have to use common sense and use sudo whenever it's needed, right? So in those cases, of course, you're not, you will have to actually attain to the best practices, security best practices that I'm actually talking about here. But in the case that if you're actually just running, Kali Linux on a laptop in your lab, or in a pen testing gig, basically you most definitely are going to run it as root, because most of those tools can only run with root privileges. Now, the default password in Kali is Toor. That is Toor. Now, you should definitely change it as soon as you install it, right? But in a lot of cases, actually running a lot of these tools as root, and the only user that you may have in the Linux distribution on your laptop may be actually the root user. Now, as I mentioned before in this lesson, there are tons of tools that are already packaged in Kali, and depending on the version of Kali that you install, you may actually have all of them, or you may have just a base install, right, that only includes a few of them, right? Now, the link that I'm actually showing here lists all the different tools that are available in Kali, and I always go to this link to find out if there are any new tools available in the latest version of Kali. There are definitely a lot of different categories. The first one is actually information gathering, and there you're actually gonna see tools like ACC check, tools actually related to Cisco, specifically like Cisco Torch, Casefile, DNS Num, DNS Map, DNS Walk, and the list just goes on and on, as you actually see here, right? So Nmap, SSL Strip, the THC IPv6 suite, Wireshark for sniffing, and many others, right? Now, the other category is vulnerability analysis, and in there you actually have a specific analysis tools for specific vulnerabilities. Like you see a few here for Cisco. You see PowerFuzzer and SFuzz. Those are actually fuzzer. SQL Map, which is actually used for database testing, as well as SQL Ninja and SQL SUS. The TCH IPv6 suite, of course, is also here because you have some utilities that are aimed for vulnerability analysis. And of course, the list goes on and on. Throughout this course, Of course, we're actually going to be hitting several of these tools, and we're going to be explaining what each of these tools are actually used for, and how you can also combine your attack. Because these attacks are actually not done in isolation, right? You may start with a passive reconnaissance and then an active reconnaissance with a scanner. Then after that, you actually perhaps identify specific victims in the network, and you launch vulnerabilities analysis tools and fuzzers to actually look for those vulnerabilities, and then go to exploitation tools, which is another category here, and use things like Armitage or Backdoor Factory, Beef, SQL Map again, several other tools that are specific for exploitation. You also have, in case you're doing actually wireless penetration testing, wireless attack tools. Aircrack NG is actually one of the most used out there, but you have things like Copathy, Crackle, and again, we're actually going to go over several of these tools throughout the whole course, right? Another category is web applications, series of tools, and I'm actually showing, the long list, stress testing, and also forensics tools, right? Now we have sniffers and tools for doing spoofing, password attack tools, also tools to be able to maintain access and persistency in the system. So after you actually exploit the system, you have some tools in here that allows you to actually maintain that persistency in that system, right? So we're actually going to be covering all these throughout the course. You're going to learn how to actually maintain persistence after you have compromised a system. You also have reverse engineering tools, things like Yara and Java Snoop and some other ones right out there. Hardware hacking tools, we actually have a few. We don't have a lot, but there's a few in here. And also even reporting tools, things like case files and KeepNote, Magic Tree, and Nipper NG, and several others, right? So as you can see, the list of tools that are in Kali are fairly comprehensive, right? And previously I mentioned that there's other tools out there like Pen2 and several of them that are available other than Kali. But Kali by far is actually one of the most complete and most comprehensive Linux distribution for pen testing, as you can actually see here.